anybody that hasn't forgotten anything.
Good. Tell me about the flu ward.
All right, you had to get by the guards. Oh, you must wear a mask. Ooh, that was so bad. You know that, don't you? In 18. And I married October the 25th, 1917. And I was a war bride, I told you that.
Right. Okay, so how big was the flu ward?
Oh, they had them on the porches, and they'd draw up sheets to keep the rain off of their feet and things like. It was horrible in Houston, Texas, when I came up there.
Now, was this in a hospital?
Oh, yes, a big base hospital.
These were on Army posts then?
Army.
So just tell me about the flu ward and how the performance went.
All right, you get past, and I'm sorry to tell you that all my life I disobeyed a little bit, just a little bit. And I'd get past them, and then I'd say to the nurses, how can I read and stand at the foot of the bed of these officers? I entertained officers mostly, except after the war. I became an entertainer with the American Legion. They selected me in our hospital, and I went to our hospitals, anybody.
Yeah.
But anyhow, this officer said to me, how, you going to take that rag off of your mouth? And I said, I can hardly wait. And I thought because he encouraged me, it is all right. And I got by with it. Well, I got by with it there, so I got by with it everywhere.
Okay, and how long would your performance last?
Oh, 15 minutes. You couldn't pin these down. But when we were with a group now, why, it was a 30-minute program. Pensacola, Florida is a heavenly place, the city armory, and the hotels. But no better than that Rice Hotel. That Rice was the pride of Houston in those days.
Did they have soldiers at the Rice?
Oh, they stayed there.
Yeah.
They lived there. And we'd entertain from the balcony, and they'd be down in front of us.
Now, how many performers?
7.
Okay, 7 performers.
7 performers.
And y'all go in like the flu ward and perform for the officers?
Not all of that bunch went in. They wouldn't go in. Like this woman from New York wouldn't go in the flu wards, a reader. She said if anything happened to her voice, she was ruined. Well, I didn't have enough sense to know that it would ruin me too, but I was interested in doing the job because I got in it so slick. All I got out of it was the good that I felt I did was their appreciation. And then I got my clothes furnished, and then I got them clean and pressed.
Did you have a uniform to wear?
No, we didn't want a uniform. We wore our clothes. Well, like when it was summer, we wore summer clothes, and winter wore two-piece, little jackets and things like that.
How long did you entertain?
Now mine was, and how long did I stay in?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I stayed in a year and a half. Honey, you must remember the war was over pretty quickly.
1918.
That's right.
Tell me about Armistice Day.
Oh, we were in Houston. We'd come up from, guess how they described me coming up from Pensacola, Florida. Mr. Grimmett didn't want me to get lost, and he said to his Masonic friend who studied masonry on the balcony with us at our apartment, the Masons, were they strong, and they still are, of course, but during the war, World War I we're speaking of, and I want you to know that he described me as this way, that I would have a purple. Do you remember the knitting bags during the war? You knitted all the time. You're so young, Joe. I feel like I'm talking to a child. Let me tell you, Joe, have you been in service?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, good. Well, anyhow, the knitting bag, you had knitting hoops, and mine was silk, purple and black striped. And I had on a khaki colored suit with a little cherry hat, red. And he described me, and I had the purple umbrella. As I got off the train, they were right there. And the loveliest people in Houston, attorneys, met me. And the reason, this is the man who studied masonry and taught it to Mr. Grimmett in Florida. And his mother lived there, and he was home on leave. And his brother had been killed. And his mother, when she met my husband, thought he looked so much like her Edgar that had been killed, no, little Eddie, that she invited me to live with her and not go to a boarding house.
So what was Armistice Day like?
Oh, it was a false one first. Wonder if I may have a drink of water.
Sure.
False armistice. You ready?
Yes, ma'am.
The false armistice, we went out and we were driven back. And Mother Steakmiller drove me out, I'll never forget it, to the camp at Houston.
Camp Logan?
Yes, and you see, that is where they were demobilized. Well, no, in Fort Worth, but that's where they went for mobilization. But at any rate, they drove us back. But then, you know, just a little while later, we got to go in. Houston turned every whistle I believe they had loose. And it was, well, tears. You talk about people didn't care whether they had many clothes on or not. They were celebrating their boys were coming home. You would have too, had you been a mother. And I was so young and jubilant. I didn't really realize all the way through, Joe, just how serious war was. You can say what you want to. I know now because I later like to lost a son 3 different times.
Did you ever hear about the race riot in Houston?
Oh, yes.
Tell me about that, what you heard.
No, I'd rather not get into it, if you don't mind.
No.
I am very close to the colored race. You know why?
Wow.
They have a right to live and everything. And I want to be one of them that's called their friend. Did you know who's going to sing at my funeral?
Who?
The West Sisters here in Altus that have made a record. They are, you know, they're the spiritual singers. Amazing Grace, How Great Thou Art.
Tell me some more about that flu epidemic.
Oh, that was an interesting thing. They taught us, that's why I know so much about taking the vital signs, the pulse, the heartbeat, you know, and all. They allowed us to take they were so short of nurses, they allowed us to put the thermometer in the boys' mouths and to give them a drink of water.
What did they do for the flu? What kind of medicines or remedies?
Now then, I cannot answer that. I do not know.
Any idea how many people died during that epidemic?
Let me tell you how fast they died in Houston on the porch with the rain coming in. They'd hold a sheet up between the bodies, and you could just see sheets on that big old porch. I can see it yet, coming up. That meant death.
Was that at Camp Logan?
Yes. And you know that's a memorial camp now, and my son, who now lives in Houston, he's at River Plantation right out of Houston now, but he lived right there at Memorial Park, and he took me all over to let me say, Mother, do you think you can recognize one place Daddy was? And I said, no, nor the camp, nor nothing. The whole Memorial Park was the camp. You turn that on, wait a minute.
Sure.
What do you think about Andrew Jackson gonna run?
Oh, Jesse Jackson?
Well, it's just run.
I don't know.
Well, wait a minute. I don't care if he's vice president.
So he's going to run for president.
I know, but
Yeah.
he'll never get there. I don't think. Go on with your interview.
Okay. Okay.
But the flu, asking me about the flu,
Yeah.
I guess I grew up in an hour's time what I witnessed and saw, because from then on, I became a different person. Even Mr. Grimmett said so.
How were you different?
Such feeling for other people and a disease, and so afraid of it. And there I'd pull my mask off and wouldn't wear it past them. I'd just wear it past the guards. Really, I've been very healthy all my life. Accidents has put me where I am today. My 8 years at the base, liking just a little bit. I got hurt out there, and it led to all this.
So when did you return to Oklahoma?
I came back. Oh, let me tell you what we thought we'd do. Come back and get him out as soon as I could, and I would let the doctor write. I was wanting the doctor to say I was pregnant to get out, but that didn't work.
How come?
Well, because they knew I wasn't pregnant.
Okay, so when did you return to Oklahoma? What year?
Well, in 1918.
1918, you came back to
Uh-huh.
Mountain View?
Yes, Mountain View.
How had Mountain View changed?
Mountain View isn't, they've got one of the oldest women's clubs in the state, the 20th Century Club. And I presume that's the only thing that's like it was, except some good people that are still there.
Tell me about the 20th Century Club.
Well, now then, my mother belonged to it, see. And when I told you about the banker, Cobes, Mrs. Cobes was one of the instigators. And see, they would meet in Oklahoma City in those days for their conventions.
What was the purpose of the 20th Century Club?
Well, like it is today, to do for others, and they get together and this and that, and you sure have to be accepted before you get in that club.
How long did you live in Mountain View?
15 years.
15 years.
Well, but when I returned, you mean? Well, you see, I was a war bride, and the first thing you know, why, Mr. Grimmett came home, and I did get pregnant. He came home in February, and I got pregnant in March, and she was born in December. And she's Mrs. Calloway Buckley of Duncan, Mary Louise. I only had 2 children, Mary Louise, born in 1919, and my son born in 22, Bob.
When did you move to Altus?
Well, you're going to make me miss an awful.
Go ahead.
The period, I didn't stay in Mountain View long. My husband, being right out of service, was trained at Welch's Hardware in Clinton, Oklahoma. And that's when we discovered that the baby was coming. And so she was born in Waurika, Oklahoma. And the finest home in Waurika, because the superintendent of the schools, of the county schools, had built it, and then going to California, wanted to lease it 2 years. We took it a year. And they really laughed at me. I got to live in the Baptist parsonage while our home was being built. And Mary Louise was a baby. She was born December the 13th, 1919.
How come you moved to Waurika?
Mr. Grimmett was with the hardware company, Steel Hardware manager.
What did Waurika look like in 1919?
Almost like it does today, low. And you know where the courthouse sits at the end of the street. And up on the hill, my daughter was born in the Ray Dyer home.
Is that home still there?
Yes, and she got to see it. And it has mirrors. The first mirrored doors that I had ever seen were in this home. You could see yourself dressed, by pulling the door and angling just right.
Who was Mr. Dyer?
He was county superintendent of Waurika, Jefferson County.
What was he like?
A very sedate, dignified man. And she was an old maid school teacher before she met him. So I will let you draw your own conclusions. And they had one son, and that son's living today. 11 war brides living in 3 blocks in Warwick, Oklahoma, were going to have babies. And those babies became good friends. And I never dreamed that my daughter would be leaving here in Altus to go to Duncan to live. And some of the girls that kept her when I was directing the play for their senior class have entertained her, been her best friends there in Duncan. Isn't that great?
That is. 1920s. What were you doing?
Well, the roaring 20s. I did everything I was allowed to do.
Were you a flapper?
No, you wouldn't call me a flapper. I was a young mother.
What is a flapper?
Really, I don't know. You know, we all draw our own conclusions what they are like.
Did you bob your hair?
Oh, listen, no. I wouldn't have bobbed hair. Not then. I did later.
When a woman bobbed her hair in the 20s, what did that mean?
What about who?
What did it mean when a woman bobbed her hair at that time?
Trying to be young and like the flappers, I think. That's what I thought.
When did you see your first car?
Oh, I drove my first car when I was a young mother. Now, I had the first car on. You would laugh at Erick, Oklahoma, when they didn't allow, the colored race in. My father and Les Nichols, the confectionery man, bought a car together, and guess what it was? The big old Rambler. You know what a Rambler is?
Yes, ma'am.
And they hired, this colored man brought it out, and he was a chauffeur, and he taught them how to drive. My father could drive a car as good as you can with 2 hands. And I want you to know, they had to let him sleep in the cellar, our cellar. We had a 5-room home then. And on that street where there were so many children.
What year was that when your father bought the car?
Well, you can count it up. It was while we were at Erick. And we went there like 1907, 8, 9, 10, along there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because it looked like he wasn't going to get to keep the car. They had to go to the country to learn how to drive the car. Do you know the Darla Hood, the late gang comedy? You know, the little Darla Hood?
Yes.
All right. Her father was my sweetheart, Jim Edgar Hood, and Jim Claude Hood. And I want you to know that when he married that girl from Leedy, Oklahoma, there I was already married and a mother. She came into the picture, and he married her. Of course, he was a banker by this time, small town banker, but later became Bank America out in California.
Do you know Darla?
Darla, I entertained her right here in Altus, Oklahoma, at our city park with the late Mrs. Boyd McMahon, John Boyd McMahon of Altus' mother. And we had to tear, Stephen's Ice Cream Company had their name on the Eskimo pies, and we had to tear everyone else before we handed it to the children because the cameras were on us, and she was under contract. Now, that's what you go through when you become a star.
How did the Depression, let me regress, do you remember the Depression of 1907?
No, as a child, I had everything I wanted.
Yeah.
And living in a hotel, the best that Erick had then, and it was a frame building.
What about the Depression of 1930s?
I remember it well. Do you know what I organized during the Depression here in Altus? Only 2 people living. Mrs. Charlie Welch of about 217 East Cypress, right there by the funeral home, the Tim's funeral home. And I organized. We owe it all to Miss Welch. She was a school teacher and a fine one. And Charlie was an electrician and a good one.
Where
And
did
a-
you organize?
And we was right here and organized at the Charlie Welch residence one night over a covered dish supper. She said, children are coming to school with cardboard tied around their feet or in their shoes because they are threadbare.
So what'd you do?
We organized, and guess what? That's the creation of the Negro Minstrel, the Kiwanis Negro Minstrel that lasted 30 years. I gave my last one in 1933. I knew after Mr. Grimmett went away.
So what do you call the organization?
I don't mean 33, 63.
What do you call the
The
organization?
Kiwanis Negro Minstrel. And it was accepted. And I used the colored race right in with my white people. And nothing was ever said till they went to having all this trouble and stirring up things. And that's what I fear with everything.
What was the purpose of the
To
group?
every dime they make, like they make now off of their travel log, was put right on the use of this county. I wouldn't even accept a gift bought with the money out of our, and we would clear around $2,000 in the 2 nights run. Don't get me started on the Kiwanis Minstrel.
Oh, go ahead,
Review.
tell me about it.
Oh, well, listen, we did great things. I had them coming out from Oklahoma City with the quartet from Oklahoma City, the law. The chief of police was my good friend and Legion commander, and he would come out, and I had them coming from Lawton, but they said, we'll never be able to pay them. I said, let's don't pay them. Don't offer them anything other than transportation. And they wouldn't take it. That was their civic pride contribution. And the reason I was a success as a Negro director, minstrel director, for a while I had to produce as well as direct. But later, I can't sing the praises of the women that have helped me. But Mrs. Earl Herron of Altus, she is terrific. And she helped me 19 years when she moved over here from Mangum. I used to pull them out of the University of Oklahoma for a weekend to give me pointers on how to bring this up to date. And we'd sit up till 3 and 4 o'clock at the late Judge Ross Rutherford's home, who was one of my quartet men. And until they'd make us, I lived down the street a block, go home and let his son rest. To have a script. See, we didn't give the old staid Negro minstrel stuff. We had it more like a gridiron. And that's why it went over big. Our scripts were used in El Reno, but they paid us $25, the club. Nobody asked them to pay anything. They sent it in here for expenses. And I've had the bass tied up with the artist painting the drops in the back, and the most beautiful, park. And I had the black dog in the white car, the white dog in the red car, with the colored and the white pulling them. And they won the case. We had nothing but unity, and that's the only way it's going to ever be. Forget all this prejudice.
Yeah.
That's the way we're going to win these wars.
Yeah. Now, the purpose of the Kiwanis Negro Minstrel was to raise money for needy children?
Yes, and they're carrying it on now. All through the county, all the youth that needed help, and they are carrying it on now with their travel log.
Yeah.
They've always, you can depend on that Kiwanis, but you can depend on our service clubs in Altus. Look what that Lions Club has done. I tell you, have you ever thought about what the former Hoyt Shaded, the mayor of Altus, has done for that Lions Club? No. And then I love to think about the JCs, what they've done for me when I was the head of the senior citizens, I just self-appointed and furnished programs down there every Wednesday at the senior citizens where they are now. And I want you to know I never was as happy as I was then, and they said I had done too much. And I'm afraid the last one I gave was too much.
When was the last one?
Well, it was 5 years ago. It will be this Christmas. You see, I got 222 merchants to give me gifts. Some of them gave two. And then I had that many eating at the luncheon. And I had a Christmas tree. And I had my directors of the Chamber of Commerce and my head of my newspaper, to come, and the head of chamber, and they were my, in other words, ambassadors, like they are today, only they were dressed up. And we had the cleverest little Christmas caps for them because the Methodist women, through Vera Tiefenteller, let me have it. Vera Tiefenteller furnished them for me.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about Pearl Harbor Day.
Oh, a day I'll never forget. I was at the Skirvin Hotel in Oklahoma City fixing to check out, and we were coming home. And I had the late sisters, Grace and Nell Neville, with me in the car, and another lady that's now deceased. I'm the only one living, and I'll never forget what we went through. We all cried all the way to Chickasha, and I had to dry my eyes, stop to be able to see on the way home. Do you realize I knew then what that meant? And you did too. Look at Wiley Ellis in Altus today, how crippled he is as a result of being blown off of the ship.
What's his name?
Wiley Ellis. He's out here every Saturday to see me because he lost his mother, and he's doing for me now instead of his mother, bringing me treats every week. He's an insurance man here, very crippled.
When you heard about Pearl Harbor, what was your first reaction?
Well, we broke down in the lobby and then cried all the way home. That's what I was telling you.
Because what did that mean?
Huh?
What did that mean? You said that you knew what it meant.
Oh, well, I knew what it meant because I was so attached to these servicemen that had gone over and everything. What it meant to their family, I just thought I knew. I just thought I knew. I later knew.
Tell me about what you did in World War II.
Do you really want me to tell you?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I organized, it was known as the American Legion Entertainment Group, and we were known as the Roman Okies. It was a show unit. First year, our husbands, Dr. Holliday, the late Dr. Holliday of Anadarko, and my husband, the late O.B. Grimmett, paid and Arthur, they're all gone. Arthur Biggert of El Reno with the Rock Island Company paid our bills and bought the boys matches and cigarettes the first year. And the merchants here in Altus, they have given, if I walked in to the merchant's store in Altus and they didn't offer to give me something, I wouldn't know how to act. Because now I have not collected for Nina Grimmett, but Nina Grimmett has reaped the reward of good service.
Okay, now, what was the purpose of the Roman Okies?
To entertain the soldiers, and you know what we got? We got the boat that the boys rather have us than the professional group, and we got paid by the American Legion the next, let's see, we were in action 7 years. I left my home.
Did you travel just around Oklahoma?
Oh, no, 4 states where our men were. Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas. Isn't that 5? 4?
4, yeah.
Amarillo, Texas, and McKinley. But we quit McKinley because they were being taken care of good out of Dallas. Mm-hmm. We proceeded to give all of our time to Amarillo and then to Fayetteville, Arkansas. Oh, what managers they had. And our Muskogee. They couldn't have beat the one we had. And you know how good they were to us. During the war, you know, we had to travel on spare tires and this and that. And they'd put tires in the back for me. The men would hear. Mr. Grimmett was in the Grimmett Auto Supply. So, at any rate, you see, the American Legion paid only our room and board. We had to buy our clothes, our show clothes and things like that.
So what did you do with the Romanopes?
I was a manager. I organized it. And I did the reading and the storytelling and suggestive stories at that, and the boys loved it. Guess what a group of professional entertainers did? You know, the old Johnny, no place to go. Oh, you know it, old Johnny, old Johnny.
Right.
All right, they built a house big and fine. My blues singer did this. And when it was finished and they were drinking beer, there was old Johnny, no place to go, not even a lace on your old patio. We had more fun with that. And the boys would bring slop jars down the aisles to us on the stage when they put on that act.
Yeah.
They put it on like they need to go to the bathroom.
Right. How many performers were in the Romanopes?
I had only 5 and then turned into 7. We
What
were,
were the names of the performers?
Verna Holliday, the pianist, and her son is now one of the big, what do they call him? He went from vicar to priest in Chicago, and his name is Holliday, but his last name is Holliday.
Who else was in the group?
All right, now then, she's at the point of death in El Reno, and her name is Lenora Biggert.
Lenora Biggert.
I'd love for you to remember her, Lenora Biggert of El Reno. And I've heard from her all along. And all of our finances were handled by the late Dr. Holliday, and out of the office, the American Legion office in Oklahoma City.
Who else is in the group?
So I'm going to be, and I'm going to live, I'm going to be 84. 88 in the 84.
November 2nd, 1983. This is Joe Todd, an interview with Nina Grimmett.
Thank you.
Good. Mrs. Grimmett, where were you born?
In Ladonia, Texas, Ladonia, in Fannin County.
When's your birthday?
April the 12th,
What year?
1896.
1896.
So you know how old I am now.
Yep, 87.
That's right.
Who was your father?
Martin Van Buren Shaw. You know by that he was a Democrat.
Right.
So am I.
Was he from Texas?
He was, no, Mississippi,
Mississippi.
raised in Texas.
Yeah. Who was your mother?
Lillian Andrews from Raleigh, North Carolina.
How come your parents came to Texas?
How come him to come to Texas?
Yeah.
My parents are,
Yeah, your father.
my father came to Texas when his father was a traveling evangelist. He had a romantic affair after the war, Civil War. He married a lady who was a charming grandmother that I never knew, but a beautiful woman. And they had 5 children. My father was one of the 5. 2 sons and 3 daughters. And they blessed Texas.
Did your father ever tell you any stories he heard about the Civil War?
No, not my father. He was too young. My father wasn't even born.
Okay.
It was my grandfather.
Okay, but did your grandfather tell your father any stories about the
Oh,
Civil War?
sure. Yeah, but my grandfather told me the stories.
Oh, okay. What was your grandfather's name?
William David Shaw, W.D. Shaw, traveling evangelist, Baptist.
What did he tell you about the Civil War?
Let me tell you the love affair about why I have a father.
Okay.
All right. His buddy died on his arm, and he looked up at him and he said, Bill, I'm not going to make it. I want you to return to Atlanta and marry. And he said, I know you don't love her like I do, but you love her enough to be a good husband to her because we were going to be married. Be good to her, Bill. And he died almost instantly.
What did he die of?
Of the battle wounds.
Oh.
On the
Which
battlefield.
battle was it, do you know?
No. But I do know this, that my grandfather was strictly a Southerner, and he couldn't give the Northerners anything. And I've had a good time all my life kidding the Northerners in a joking manner.
Yeah.
When I was service club director, even I was drafted, and I'm proud of that. I was 53 out here at the Altus Air Force Base, and I'm not supposed to be over 39 as a service club director. And I want you to know every time those northern boys would come in, I'd say, now, my name is Mrs. Grimmett, and I live in Altus. I'm Baptist, a Democrat, and a Southerner. And I'd say, you're a cute little Northerner if I like you. If I don't like you, you're a plain damn Yankee.
So did your grandfather return to Atlanta?
No, the home of Mary, though, had later was in Fulton, Mississippi. And that's where my grandfather returned. And he married Mary, and they were blessed with 3 charming daughters who were a blessing in the towns they lived in, Birmingham, Alabama, Atlanta, Georgia, and Texas. And they raised doctors, one lawyer in the crowd, but most of all, they were with L&N Railroad Company, the L&N.
Yeah. Did your grandfather tell you any other stories about the Civil War?
Oh, listen, he was so full of stories. But my grandfather was a very devoted Christian, and I was taught that I mustn't go to dances and things like that like they were taught in those days. But he learned later, after he lost our beloved Mary, we all loved her to pieces, and he married a woman just exactly the age of his oldest daughter, 18 years old. And that made a division in the family. But I love this new grandmother, too. It's all I ever knew.
Right. What about the stories he told you about the Civil War? Do you remember any of them?
Yes.
Can you tell me
The
something?
Battle of Atlanta.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, I don't know too much, but he asked me if I ever had a chance to go to Atlanta, Georgia. That was something in those days to ask a child to go to Atlanta, Georgia. I had the privilege of seeing that gorgeous array there at Atlanta, Georgia, which is the pride of Atlanta, Georgia, and you know it, the cyclorama.
Yeah. Did he say that's pretty accurate, that cyclorama?
Oh, no, he didn't allude, he couldn't allude to that, it wasn't even built.
Yeah, oh, okay.
But the thing is, he told the Battle of Atlanta so vividly that as I walked in, I stood it all.
What did he say about that battle?
Well, the men dying and the blood streaming was a vision that he never forgot. And I had that later when the son was a reconnaissance officer and liberated Rome that June 5th, I'll never forget it, and said, the stench of death is still in my nostrils after he came home, wounded 3 times. So war has repeated itself.
Yeah. Any other stories he told you about the Civil War you remember?
No, because he was so full of religion.
Yeah. Okay. How long did you live in Texas?
Until I was about 8 years old. Oh, say, did you know I came to Oklahoma in February before statehood that year in 1907? And never will I forget, I didn't know about drunkards and whiskey being sold because I guess I was a little young. But I want you to know that I'll never forget, we came to Erick, Oklahoma. My father was a cotton buyer. One arm, he lost one arm early in life when I was just 3 and the brother was 1. I have a brother in Lawton, R.W. Shaw, still living.
Yeah. Oh. That's the microphone.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. How did you come to Oklahoma?
Oh, on the train. And we brought our maid, and we didn't call her a maid, we called her a member of the family. But she was Aunt Matilda. And she had a nursing baby the same age of my sister. At the time, my sister had smallpox, measles, in Texas, in Ladonia, and never will I forget. They let her nurse the colored lady because the children were the same age, and my mother took the measles, and it wouldn't have done. Yeah. And they, that day, they didn't put them on bottles. They fed them malted milk. Horlicks malted milk. But my memory is very, very vivid of all I was ever told.
Yeah. What about the train trip? Tell me about the trip.
Oh, the train was, we were on it 3 days and got to eat and go up and down the aisle. And the baggage man liked us, and the man selling fruit and everything, and we would buy it, and then he'd take us in the coach where he made it up, put it in the baskets. It was fun.
Where'd you sleep on the train?
In the seats.
In the seats?
Yes.
What town did you come to in 1907?
1907? No, yeah, in February. And it was so cold, we nearly froze. We were in Elk City, Oklahoma, and that's when we were told we couldn't take Aunt Maggie with us any farther, that they didn't let the sun go down on a colored person in Erick, Oklahoma.
Is that Aunt Matilda?
Uh-huh. Well, no, her name is really Maggie.
Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you couldn't take her to Erick?
And my mother had, the conductor was nice enough to get off the train, communicate with my father. And you know what he said? He told them, the people there at the station in Elk City, that he wanted a ticket back, guaranteed at the other end of pay for Matilda. Really, Aunt Maggie.
Mm-hmm. So you couldn't take Aunt Maggie with you?
No. And we were scared to death because we never heard of such a thing. We had someone to sweep the yard. We had someone to sweep the porch. We had someone to do the washing. And, they were treated like members of the family.
What kind of work did your father do?
A cotton buyer.
Cotton.
He had to learn that after he lost the arm.
How did he lose his arm?
In the cotton gin. And he said to them, just a minute. But it was too late. He had given instructions to start the machinery, but he put a 2x4 down between there, and he reached down to stop the motor from taking him all in. But it got his arm clear up to his shoulder, and they had to take a few inches of the shoulder. But he wore padded shoulders, and if I do say it, I had a good-looking mother and daddy.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about Statehood Day.
Do you want me to tell you when statehood came in November the 16th, 1907?
Tell me about that day.
My mother clung to us, or we clung to my mother, and she had my sister, 4 years old, in her lap. And I'll never forget the hollering, yelling, going out of town at Erick, the cowboys on their horses. I don't know, they called them cowboys. And they closed they weren't saloons. Half of a drugstore was a saloon. Because we'd go in there to get things, and Mr. J.M. Carter later moved to Martha from Erick, and then moved here. And one of the instructors in our school, Ms. Kenneth Cox, is a granddaughter of Mr. Carter. And he was a devout Christian. And he did not drink or do any of those things. But the thing is, they had the products to sell to those who did.
Yeah. Now, did you live in Erick at this time?
Oh, yes, everything's in Erick now.
Yeah.
I'm there. And I was there for 3 years.
Tell me what kind of celebrations they had on Statehood Day.
Yelling and hollering and shooting at and everything. They didn't have any celebration other than that, closing the saloons and statehood coming in.
What did they do with all the whiskey?
I do not know as a child. I was never told what they did with it. I can't feel. They threw it away and did all that. It was evidently shipped back. That's my supposition.
Yeah. Okay, after you came to, what kind of house did you live in Erick?
Oh, we had to stay at a hotel because we didn't have a house. And
What's the name of it?
we had 4 rooms. And it was a boarding house.
What was the name of the boarding house?
Oh, I'm trying to think.
Oh, okay.
And I hope to before the interview's over. But Warren, the Warren boarding house, Warren. And by the way, their descendants still live in Erick. One of their daughters married a banker there.
What was it like to live in the boarding house?
Well, I liked it. I thought it was fun. I didn't have anything to do other than play.
What kind of games did you play?
Oh, do you know that hide and seek and dropping the handkerchief and bad man's bluff and all that, that's all we knew.
Mm-hmm.
You must remember I wasn't too old.
Where did you start school?
In Erick? Well, of course, then I was studying under Miss Una Colquitt, Governor Colquitt of Texas, niece in Ladonia, Texas. One thing my father always saw to, I had the very best of dramatic teachers, and even when I was a little girl, and it was called elocution in those days, and music teacher.
And what was your teacher's name?
Una Colquitt.
Mm-hmm. What was she like?
Beautiful. To me, I worshipped her. And I thought when I grow up, if I can be like Miss Una Colquitt of Texas, I've got it made. And then came to Oklahoma and had an old maid for a school teacher, which is great because she became one of my dearest friends.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to study.
How large was the school in Erick?
Well, Erick isn't too large yet, but gee, I love the memory of what I found there. Did you know we had 11 children in one block in Erick after we got a home? In one block. They're living in Mangum, they're still living in Erick, and they have come down to see me.
Good. How many students were in the school when you started?
Now that I cannot answer.
Yeah. Was it a one-room schoolhouse?
Oh, no, I didn't live in that period. I lived in a 2-story school building. Didn't you know it? High school was upstairs. You know what I mean. 9th grade was in high school. And 8th grade was common school. And I graduated from common school then. Now, come on, let's go to Mountain View, Oklahoma, right over here, east of Hobart.
Tell me about Mountain View.
Oh, I love it yet.
Why'd you move to Mountain View?
Well, because my father set up a company. And he had a company at Elk City, and he had a company in Hobart.
What kind of company?
Cotton company, 5 men. They were all owners.
What was the name?
Oh, the Shaw Cotton Company, S-H-A-W. Now understand, I had a brother and the prettiest curly-headed golden curls sister who later became Lawton's Mary. She was known as Lawton's Mary, Mary Pocorny. I just lost her 4 years ago.
Did you ever meet a man named Forrest Knipe, K-N-I-P-E?
Well, the Knights were very prominent in Mountain View.
No, this is in Oklahoma City.
Oh, no,
Yeah, okay.
Did you know that the Knights were the undertakers and married my husband? Later I married O.B. Grimmett. That was his name. Ole Biggs, Dr. Biggs named him Dr. Biggs, named him Ole Biggs Grimmett. That made him O.B. Grimmett.
How big was Mountain View?
Well, it's about it was larger then than it is now.
What did the town look like? Can you describe
Now,
it?
yes, I lived in the new town. I never lived in the old town across the river.
Okay, what was the new town like? Describe it.
Well, I only know, all right, a Main Street, one newspaper. But the main thing was we had 2 banks. And I am proud to say my father became interested in the second bank, but the main bank was practically owned by A.E. Kobes, K-O-B-S, and that strain still owned. No, they sold the bank this year. And the boys of the A.E. Kobes, Maurice, his older son, married my nephew. So we've got that Kobes bank in the family a little bit. Proudly, I say that.
And you said you had one newspaper and 2 banks.
Yes, and Main Street and 2 drugstores. And we liked the Sumner drugstore better than the other drugstore because they let us kids hang out in the back and cut up.
Who were some of the prominent people beside the Sumners?
Well, A.E. Kobes and Mrs. Kobes were very prominent, but don't forget A.E. Stinson, and their strain is still there.
What did they do?
Oh, they had the big Stinson Mercantile Company, 5 departments. It was listen, we had a big town in our minds. It was not,
Oh, yeah.
Dascom Daniel Lumber Company, and I thought that was the lumber company, and the George Wells Lumber Company.
How long did you live in Mountain View?
15 years.
50. What year did you move there?
Well, let's count it up. Wouldn't it be 1910? 1910. I graduated from common school, it was called then, the 8th grade, and entered high school.
In what year?
In we'll have to count it up. Wait a minute. I graduated in 16.
16.
Yes.
Can you just give me an overview of what it was like to live in Oklahoma?
Gorgeous. You've got me started. You asked for it.
Go ahead.
Oklahoma to me has given everybody that ever entered its portals a good chance to be good, honest, truthful citizens, and have everything. And I have loved nearly all the governors. And I'm very much in love, I call him my son, with George Nigh. I've even pinned, well, not diapers on him, but put on training pants, so he won't deny it, at American Legion conventions, because his mother was a charming woman from McAllister, and played the piano for our American Legion Auxiliary. And we ladies on the front row that held offices had to take care of little Georgie, because he came to her in late life. You know, you're most pleasant to have an interview with.
Thank you.
You really are.
Tell me some more about Oklahoma. What do you think?
Well, I love Oklahoma. I know I was born in Texas, but let me tell you something. It's Oklahoma I salute. Texas has got enough people sufficiently saluting them. But listen, talk about, I even love Big Red so. Oh, you, that I chew the Big Red chewing gum. Did you know this is a wonderful place if you come this late in life to living here in the English Village nursing home? But getting back to Mountain View,
Yes, ma'am.
I married when I was in Mountain View, and I was a war bride. There was no wedding other than at the Presbyterian manse in Anadarko, Oklahoma. And Mr. Grimmett was in service. He answered the call early. They had the great idea, he and some boys, that if they went early, they'd all get to be together. That was put out, if you remember. You weren't born. But the thing is, Joe, it originated from the old 20th, and his was known as the Company G 43rd Infantry that originated in Salt Lake City. And while he was there, he'd been gone 6 weeks. And we were sorry we hadn't married. And he had an uncle dying who was a very wealthy uncle and favored the only nephew, O.B. Grimmett.
What did he do in the Army, in the service?
Just an infantryman. Infantryman.
Did he ever talk about what he did in the war?
No, because I was with him. I later got to be an entertainer after visiting the men in Little Rock.
And about being an entertainer, entertaining the troops. Tell me about that.
Well, it was fun. I was a reader, and I told stories.
Do you remember any stories you told?
No. Now, I told stories to servicemen, and I was taught them. And all my life I've told stories. I told you one this morning I can't tell in the interview, but I can tell you about the a little colored girl boy. Jackie Horner stood on the corner watching all the putty girls go by, and along came a beauty, and he said, "Hi there, cutie." Now he's got a big black eye. Well, even that simple story would entertain a man lying sick in a hospital.
How did you begin entertaining the troops?
Well, I was with Red Cross Horner out of Lincoln, Nebraska.
Red Cross Horner?
Chautauqua.
Okay.
Chautauqua. Do you know what a Chautauqua is? It's like a lyceum number. Mm-hmm. You know what that is. You know you have travel logs now. But at any rate, Mr. Grimmett's captain, I'll never forget him, heard me play the piano, and I played the Marseillaise, and they had 12 instructors from France there instructing the men at Camp Robinson. See, that's out of Little Rock, Arkansas. And I don't know what happened. He liked me and I liked him, and he was nice to my husband, he was his captain of Company G, 43rd Infantry, and the first thing you know, I was told if I'd come home at the end of Christmas holidays. I was with Mr. Grimmett's mother and auntie for the trip and all, and we were at the Marion Hotel. He says, "I think I will send you a letter of instructions what you have to do, and you can be right along with us as an entertainer." I couldn't believe it because I didn't finish anything. Oh, I did finish high school over at Oklahoma College for Women in the preparatory section, and studied under good instructors. The late and famous Josh Lee was one of my instructors. You don't know him, but you certainly have heard his name in Oklahoma and from the university.
What did the letter of instruction say?
I had to have the signing of 2 ministers, a doctor, my congressman, and that was the beginning of me knowing anything about politics, you might say, because my father he'd instilled it in me, but I had to ask a senator and a congressman for endorsement of knowing my parents and their strain and how faithful they were to this country.
So he was a congressman?
At the time I went over?
Yes.
Listen, listen, I don't believe I better say, but I can certainly tell you the senator, Senator Elmer Thomas of Walton.
Mm-hmm. What was he like?
A white hair statesman like we need today so badly, like Bob Kerr was.
Yes. What was his personality like?
Well, a very charming gentleman, more like we will say, a reservist. You know, he was very reserved. He had the prettiest, pinkest skin and the whitest hair. And I used to think, oh, when Mr. Grimmett gets older, I just hope he has that complexion. He had a fair skin, and then that pretty white hair.
Did you know Senator Gore, T.P. Gore?
Oh, I loved T.P. Gore.
Tell me about
The
it.
blind senator
Yes.
was one of the most patient men that I ever knew. And do you realize he has a nephew in this city and a niece living here in Altus? Lawyer Gore, here.
What was T.P. Gore's personality like?
Well, you knew he was our blind senator.
Yes.
Well, he didn't go around feeling around places. He, with that cane, went determined where he was going, as if he could see. And he wanted to help mankind. And I'll never forget. Say, by the way, he was on that scoreboard for me, my recommendations.
Okay.
But my Dr. Hathaway, and what a charming doctor he was from Mountain View, gave me every credential I should have. And later I found out from my captain that Dr. Hathaway's recommendation rated higher than my pastor, Whaley, registered higher, had more effect about my character and everything.
You say Senator Gore wanted to help mankind.
He was great on helping mankind.
What did he do?
A lawyer.
Yeah, okay. How did he help mankind? What trouble
Doing
did he
things.
do?
Have you ever written a letter to your senator and asked him to do something and get a job done? Okay, things were going on then, trouble like it is today. Not as bad. But remember, we'd just come out of a big war.
How long were you an entertainer with the troops?
Well, okay, let me tell you what I did. I hardly got to be with Mr. Grimmett other than I'd come in weekends. We went from Pensacola, Florida. When I got my credentials and to come, do you know I had to pay my own expenses? My father paid every dime of them. Thank goodness he was able in those days to do it.
Yeah. Where did you travel?
I went from Mountain View. You must remember I was teaching dramatics and music theory in the Carnegie schools and in the Fort Cobb schools and Mountain View. And even after I came back and married, I did that. I mean, after the war, and I had children, I did that. But getting back to this, you wanted to know.
Where did you travel from Mountain View?
Oh, where I went to entertain?
Yes, while you
Well, I
entertained.
left here and went to Pensacola, Florida, and got my bearing from there, and traveled with 7. And Elsa Shaw and her husband, who were the chaperones, you might say, and the violinists and the concert pianist. She was a reader. They later figured in my life in Oklahoma after I was a mother of 2 children.
Did you ever go overseas?
No. See, no, that was the stipulation. I could not be sent out of the United States. None of the Red Path Horners, Chautauqua, until they broke away and joined what Bob Hope, you might say now, has as the USO. It became the USO. Oh,
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
So the name of your group, what was the name of your group again?
It wasn't a name. It was entertainers
Okay.
for you servicemen.
And it was a Chautauqua group.
Yes. No, well, it was more like a Chautauqua. It was violinists. It was pianists. It was humorous readers.
Tell me what, how's it?
What?
How would you entertain the troops? How would the average?
All right, let me
performance go?
let me take you through the flu ward.
Okay.
All right.
Let me change this tape.
Okay. No, I don't mean that. I meant when this starts.
Oh, okay, there it goes. And are there any other entertainers around that were in the Romanokes besides Miss Bigger?
Let's see. No, because the last one of them was in Amarillo, Texas at the air base and died. No. Now, some of them are still living that were specialty acts and things like that, but so numerous, I don't even remember their names.
You say you are president of the American Legion Auxiliary?
I served, in 1940, let's see, in 1940, let's see, 48, and again and I was Girl State Director. I'm so proud of that. Girl State Director twice, in 48 and 53 in Oklahoma. And I'm on the honorary member, I'm on the Girl State Board, but I'm on the state board of the past presidents of Oklahoma of the American Legion Auxiliary yet.
Did your son go to the war?
Oh, yes, he was seriously wounded 3 different times.
Tell me about it.
Well, may I tell you first, he was prepared himself. He went to New Mexico Military Institute.
What's your son's name?
Robert Shaw Grimmett. Lives in Houston, Texas. Out in the suburb of River Plantation.
And he went to New Mexico
Military Institute. And was an honored student and played on the football team and was known as Daddy. He carried the ball.
What did your son do in the war?
A reconnaissance officer. He was commissioned, let me tell you this. He left the 3rd year, I'm proud of this. We didn't have to pay a dime of the expense. Little West Point. They selected the top 6 military schools of the United States. And my son, of a class of 266 in New Mexico, became one of the top 16. So he was selected. How many more out of that class? 6 is all I know. But at any rate, I was out there so much at the time because I believed in it. And we had 9 boys from Altus at one time out there. Prominent boys, right here in Altus. Paul Mock.
Yeah. Where was your son wounded?
Where?
Yeah, was he in the European theater?
Oh, yes, European. He rode the first vehicle into Rome on June the 5th.
What division was he in?
He was the 40, wait a minute, I don't want to mix his daddies, reconnaissance unit. He was attached to the 88th Division Infantry. He's a reconnaissance officer, of course, that moves ahead, which you know. And they came up on some terrible things in Italy, in Rome that day. But all of his men were northern men except one, but they were all Catholics. Yeah. Of his 12 men. He is the 12th man.
You say that
he rode in, their planes were limited. And he rode in, he was trained plane of a pilot and a gunner. And he had to ride those big tanks. And his picture came out in the paper, Saturday Evening Post, Life magazine notified us on such and such a day it would appear. And it did. But we would have never known him other than side view, because he's got a turned up nose like me. But his hat, that helmet, came down so far. Yeah. But it's north of Italy where he got his.
He rode the first vehicle into Rome?
Sir?
You say he was on the first vehicle into Rome?
He rode the first vehicle into Rome that day, and they have the credit of that. It was horrible what they came upon. A young Italian woman who married a United States doctor. They had ruined him for life, left him bleeding and dying, and my son and his group, later I got to know two of the boys, and my son has never seen any of his people, and three have been through here and called him long distance, talk from my phone. But
What's your son's address?
All right, let me give you the simple one.
Okay.
All right, R.S. Grimmett, or Bob, he's known everywhere down there, is Bob Grimmett, and he's with Rockwell Manufacturing out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but here, Box 516. Let's send it to the one they get it even on Sunday. Box, all right, Conroe. That's a little town, right? Not very little.
Conroe, Texas.
Uh-huh.
Box 516.
77301.
Okay, thank you. What did you do when the war ended? What was that celebration?
Oh, honey, he was brought home seriously wounded. He had on a, pardon me, he had on a bathrobe with pajamas and a handkerchief and scuffs is all he came home with. He even kissed the car when he got off the plane. He was with all that mob that fell to the earth and kissed the soil that they took pictures of.
What did you do when the war ended that day?
What did he do?
What did you do?
I do. After he called me from Miami, and we spent $99 talking every few minutes, just as soon as he could get another phone, and me screaming and yelling, and I got his little wife there. He married Jane Grimmett, and she's very important in his life. And her parents were the Moss Bryans of Altus. Her mother lives with him now, Marie Hutchison, who was with public service 30 years.
While you were in Houston, did you ever meet Miss Lima?
No.
Do you know her? Know who she was?
No.
She was a daughter of Governor Hogg.
Oh, I'm a hog and you're a hog and this and that.
Yes.
I know who you're talking about, but I never knew the hogs.
Tell me some more about your childhood.
My childhood?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I thought I had everything because I was never denied anything, because I had a fond grandmother and grandfather on my mother's side, grandmother and Dad Andrews, and they were young. And my grandfather was a singer, a tenor. Well, my mother and daddy had good voices. My father was a professional. And I used to get to play for him. Do you know one of the greatest experiences of my life?
What?
Everlasting and never leave my memory. And someone here at the English nursing home said the other day, you know, I didn't know the Masons buried at night. I said, they don't. They have their service at night. At midnight, a 32nd degree. And I paid for it with my father holding the flashlight in Mountain View, Oklahoma, that little town. Dr. R.D. Reynolds and my brother married Ruby Reynolds, the youngest girl.
Did your grandmother ever tell you stories about the Civil War?
Oh, no, my grandmother didn't live during the Civil War. She was a graduate of Lewisburg in women's college there in Raleigh, North Carolina. And do you know the steps are still there? And when I got to visit there years ago to see Jim McClinic in Washington, D.C. and visit my grandfather Andrews, after we'd lost our grandmother, I got to stand on the steps. That's the only things, and 2 columns that's reserved or preserved there at that college. And I got to see the Negro Mammy family that helped raise my mother.
Yeah.
Wasn't that historical?
Yes. You say you went to OCW.
Yes, Oklahoma College for Women.
Tell me about your days there. What was the school like?
Well, listen, it was in its infancy. Do you know when that was? 16 and 17, dear heart.
Who founded that school?
Oh, now I can't say that, but one of the first presidents was G.W. Austin, George Washington Austin. And his niece was the banker's wife over here at Roosevelt in Cooperton.
What was he like, Mr. Austin?
Oh, nearly like my father, even combed his hair like my father, and they both were from Fulton, Missouri. And that's the reason I had to go to OCW. I didn't want to leave my class in Mountain View and go to OCW.
What was Mr. Austin's personality like?
Very commanding. Do the best you can every hour, 'cause it's passing you by.
And how long did you go to school there?
I went there 2 years.
Who was your favorite instructor?
Oh, Rudolph Richter, the piano, and and she's still living, Frances Denmore Davis. Frances Denmore Davis. D-E-N Moore Davis.
Did she live in Chickasha?
Yes, she's retired there. She is the most cultured and the most, well, we'll say, you talk about elocution and drama and everything, she's got it. And I was a Negro impersonator, dialect. And she said, I wouldn't change you for the world. I'll give you material. Handle it your way.
Did you live on the campus, or did you?
Now, yes, I want to tell you. I was living in town right next to the Episcopal church and had diphtheria. And my grandmother was there with me. She went away to school with me. And I want you to know that I couldn't come home every Friday from Chickasha to Mountain View. You had to come on the train. Do you understand? Because my father couldn't leave the streets afraid he'd miss a bale of cotton. You know what I mean. They climb up on the side and and then later had the cotton company. But my father wanted me to have the best of instructors. But G.W. Austin is the cause of me going, and I've always thanked him silently, because he died.
Did you board with the family there next to the Episcopal church?
Did I what?
Did you board with the family?
No, I lived in the home, and it was like a duplex. And my grandmother was with me. They fixed it up like a captain, someone. He was very prominent there in Chickasha. I don't really.
You said you lived on campus.
Oh, then later I went. What they annexed to the campus, the Stubbs Annex, and that old 2-story Stubbs Annex. I later saw it. You know, I couldn't live in the dormitory, the brick. Well, it was full, see, and I didn't go there when I should have.
Now, what was the Stubbs Annex?
Well, it was 2-story, just girls.
Just a building there?
Yeah, we went to the college to eat.
Okay.
But, you know, bad mornings when we couldn't, we were fed our breakfast by Mrs. Stubbs.
What did you study?
Everything pertaining to fine art. I just took enough English and language to get by. And math. And I would need a computer because I'm not good in math.
I'm not either. Well, what else you want to talk about?
Well, I have 2 fine sons. Children. The daughter, who's going to be 64 in December, and the son, who's going to be 62 in January.
Have any grandkids?
I have 5 grandchildren. The son gave me 3. I had the only son in the Grimmett family, clear back to the Missouri line. And then at last they gave us a son. And I have a grandson. But then I have 8 great-grandchildren. I have 4 in Houston I'm going to show you their pictures in a minute. She is so beautiful to look at that if she used to walk down that hall, you'd leave me in this interview and go follow her. I'm not kidding. And she is the mother, and she has a live-in maid. She married pretty well. They've worked it out together. Anyhow, she married Justin White III of Houston, Texas. And you know what he is?
What?
Can I say what I want to say?
Sure.
Well, he's the Coors distributor for the city of Houston. I mean Galveston, Corpus, and all. He's a kind of a poor boy.
Well, Mrs. Grimmett, I think we have a good interview.
Well, I hope so.
I've enjoyed this.
There was one phase of my life you didn't let me tell.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm so proud of it. My years on the bass,
Oh,
say 7.5, because I didn't complete quite 8. Well, that's where I got hurt. That's why I'm in the wheelchair.
Now, why did you go to the base?
Well, I was drafted by General Glenn M. Jones of Tactical Air Command.
You were drafted.
I was drafted. He had said to me, his secretary called me to report. You know how that I was hired? He hired me through my husband. He saw me preside and all. He was witness, and he was honoree at a big banquet up on the 2nd floor of what is now the townhouse down in Altus. It was the lovely Abbott Hotel or New Orient. And I had a Presbyterian minister that I liked to poke jabs at, and he was a storyteller and an entertainer from Wichita Falls. And I'll never forget, when I finished that luncheon, I heard Walter Gobel, the late Walter Gobel, the banker here in Altus, say, you know, you're going to be knocked over when you know what you pulled at the luncheon. And I said, a mistake? And he said, no, I think you've paved your way. And I didn't know what he meant. And then when I met Glenn M. Jones, our general, you see, it was my privilege to be on his committee, to have 48 women under me to serve the women of the base. And it's a good thing we were organized. This is long before I knew. Now, Mr. Grimmett knew I was going to the base in June, the end of the fiscal year, on June the 30th. But see, I didn't know it, and this is in April, when we had the great tragedy of 14 killed. They hit the mountainside in California. And we had to go into the churches and the homes. These women that I had so organized to tell the families about the...
What did you do on the base?
I was service club director.
What are your duties?
Do you know what they were?
What?
Do you know what? You might say I was the nursemaid for the 3 lower grades, the first, third, second, and third. But I thought I would own the base, because General Jones said, never let a 2-bit lieutenant keep me from getting to him. And I felt like Miss Astor's poodle. Wouldn't you have, when the general said that to you? No, sir, how come it happened? They sent me away to Wilmington and Norfolk, Virginia, to take the course, a refresher course. Refresher, listen, I had never done anything but volunteer during World War II out there, and I want you to know that I never was so surprised when I boarded the plane. They took me in a little chopper from here to the city, put me on the real airlines, I mean the main airlines. And that is when Victor Wickersham of Mangum was then, you know what he was, congressman. And Bob Kerr was our senator. And of course, Bob Kerr was like my own brother. In fact, Bob Kerr and I guess were closer than my brother and I. We've become closer in the latter years. But at any rate, I'll never forget what I learned on that trip. I learned I didn't know one thing about being service club director, only I lived among fine people, and I had entertained and done all around here, and I could come back and say to Mr. Jones in Mangum and your Chamber of Commerce, I need your girls for the fine boys I'm going to have. And I don't want any cheap girls. I want them to be the finest you have. And I had a time with Altus making them believe that's the way it's going to be. But I won Altus over, and we had good ones.
What did you do at the base during World War II? What kind of
Well,
volunteer work?
World War II,
Yeah.
I helped a captain's wife. She was service club director. Oh, listen, they had a time during World War II, you know, getting the right material. You know, when I say that, I say it, well, proudly, because we want the right people over our men. But at any rate, it was so hard hit and hit so fast, even without warning, that service club directors were hard to find. And she was raised over here at Duke, and just this moment, I can't remember her name, but she was lovely. And I would volunteer, and I'd say, I can bring you out 4 women, or say 3 beside myself in the car, and we'll help you tonight with the dances and things like that. And that's where I learned the greats of the military. My own experience during World War I helped me a great deal. But I love this air base, and now Jimmy J., the last Commander Jimmy J., Colonel, that left us, and got several new ones since, but at any rate, he was very close to me and had promoted a boy over my recommendation with an officer, that young man, David Young, of Fort Smith, Arkansas, would come here and see us every Sunday, and when the preacher didn't show up in the afternoon, he would preach, and we would have services. And it's wonderful to be associated with a base that'll cooperate like that. And that's what this base is all about. And Altus better be proud the day it is ever brought here in 1953, January the 8th, when it was opened.
Mrs. Grimmett, I've enjoyed this.
Well, you've been charming. You've just taken my life. We've just riddled it. But anyhow, I've had the funniest type of life, and the serious, and have hit some of the most terrible snags to try to help. Do you know why I think the Lord's let me live?
Why?
Because I can get around in my wheelchair. I use my legs well, and it's in my hips. I've had hip surgery 4 times. And I want you to know that if I think that somebody's being neglected, I just ring the bell myself, and I get them here. Good. I go in and say good morning every morning to these around me.
Thank you.
Where was this, Nina?
Well, out of Ada and Oklahoma City, Elk City, and Mountain View.
Tell me about Senator Kerr.
He was one of the most devout Christians that I've ever known in all my life, that lived it daily. Did you know what he did when he was United States Senator?
What?
He brought Billy Graham to the White House, put him on the steps on the east side where they're sworn in, where they take their oath, for 3 weeks, and paid for it himself. And then 3 more weeks, the newspaper men of Oklahoma footed the bill. And thank goodness Harrington Wimberly of Altus and my son-in-law, Callaway Buckley, were in on the 1,000 and more from here. The newspaper men gave $500 or $1,000, and they kept him there 3 more weeks.
Ms. Grimmett?
Uh-huh.
I'd like some information on Senator Kerr's childhood.
All I can tell you is beginning with World War I.
Tell me about it.
All right, he was in school at Ada. And he was one of your going to make a teacher, which he did later. And he enlisted from there, his hometown Ada. Do you realize the log cabin, he's buried right near it, that he paid for the log cabin. In other words, the mortgage was raised by him when he made his first oil. You know, he had several checks that he put in with Uncle Frank Phillips of Bartlesville, you know, that wasn't good. But they hit it with one well, and he went from there. Bob Kerr was, of the three brothers, he was the one the mother would point to, my son will succeed. She was a woman who really got everybody told in a few words, and she'd say, my son Robert will be the head of this state, this nation. She really thought he would be president, and was for him when he ran for president.
Right. What was your relationship with Senator Kerr
Just good friends.
as a child?
As a young lady away in school, and him in school at Ada, called a normal. It was known as a normal, teachers college. And I was OCW, Oklahoma College for Women. And we met at different state things, speakers, learning how to say speeches and things like that. He didn't have to learn how, he knew how. Joe, when I think of Senator Kerr, I think it with all the pride in the world, because I think of him really next to my father, with no exceptions, because I knew the inner Bob Kerr, and he never, may I tell you the experience I had when he was going to run for governor? I was attending a convention of the American Legion Auxiliary. In the meantime, I had married O.B. Grimmett, as I told you in my interview yesterday. Ole Biggs Grimmett named himself for Dr. Ole Biggs of St. Louis. And I want you to know he got me out of the old little church there at Comanche, Oklahoma. You know where it is, near Lawton. And I'll never forget what he said. And it scared me because, see, he wasn't to speak until the luncheon at 1. And when I saw him, I thought something had happened. And he said, and he was under a big shade tree there in that churchyard, right on the highway. And he said, listen, my friend, I need your help. I want you to resign from the Blind Commission of Oklahoma. Go home, rest a few weeks, and I've got a job for you. I'm going to run for governor. Oh, yes. I'm going to run for governor. And I said, if I thought running for governor would cause you to be as honoring and as sorry as some we've had, I'd vote against you now. And he dug his heels like Will Rogers would have done in the earth. And he says, have I ever failed to keep my word and keep my feet on the ground with all that's happened to me, from a poor boy to now one of Oklahoma's wealthiest men? And I said, no. He said, are you interested? And I said, yes, with the understanding I don't want to return to the Capitol as head of the blind. He said, you won't have to, but I'll have to appoint you, because my friends in the campaign, we're going to win this, Nina, would feel terrible to me if I didn't give you back your job. And I said, I've had nearly 4 years, that's enough. And I have served them well, because my heart has been in it.
What'd you do on his campaign?
I headed the women of Oklahoma. And when he called me in and told me he wanted me the head of the women's campaign, of his campaign, I said, sit up here in one of these offices, dress up in the morning and come in and fuss at one another. No, I want to be out in the byways and edges. He said, that's what I wanted you to do, but I didn't have the nerve to ask you. What do you think O.B. will say? I said, he'll be for you, even though he's a Republican. Well, I've got him registered right. Because what is anyone doing in Jackson County if they're not a Democrat? I feel sorry for the other side here. It used to be pitiful. There were 6.
How many are there now?
Well, they've got a few more.
What made Senator Kerr decide to go into politics?
I think he saw the lack of leadership and statesmanship. Now, he considered himself a statesman, and I believe Francis Herron, sitting here in this room as a witness, will vouch that he was a true statesman. You know what he did when he was going to be inaugurated in 48? I went up for the inauguration with the late Andrew Potter, Dr. Andrew Potter of the Southern Baptist Convention. You know, he was the secretary. And my dear friend that's passed on, May Honeycutt of Muskogee, who was my assistant. I named her as my assistant because Senator Kerr adored May Honeycutt of Muskogee. And so we went up for it, and Dr. Andrew Potter was our chaperone. In other words, we could attend the banquet, we could attend everything because Senator Kerr saw to it. He did not pay for it. He gave us his and his wife's pass because they were busy moving their furniture in. I was amused at times with Senator Kerr and Grace. Gee, she was a lady, and he was so proud of her. And those 4 great children they had. But at any rate, getting back to Senator Kerr, he gave us his pass to the banquet, and I sat in less than 15 feet of President Truman. May I have water?
So this is the inauguration of President Truman?
1948.
Yeah.
And I was president of the American Legion of Girl State of Oklahoma. And I felt like Mrs. Astor's poodle when I went to Washington because I was Senator Kerr's appointed friend to go to that convention of the inauguration. And I never was as shocked in my life when he turned to me and said, "Here's an envelope. Wait till you get to your room to look at the contents." And when we got to our room, Dr. Andrew Potter had a room on the 3rd floor, and ours was on the 5th. And you know, I would like to sidetrack a little bit. You know, West Point marches. And we had a boy from Altus, John Shelley, a dear friend of the Leighton of Ville Sisters of Altus. One served as a postmaster here. But getting back to this, it rained as it always does down Pennsylvania Avenue. And we stood on, the old Raleigh's been torn down, but we stood on the balcony. And they were renting the space of the windows, you know, you could walk out, for $15 a stand. And Fulton Lewis Jr., the newsman, offered us that to stand in ours. And I said, well, I can tell you one you can stand in on the 3rd floor because he's not here. He's with Senator and Mrs. Kerr going to be sworn in out there and this and that. He said, can I stand in there and have that? I said, yes, and his microphone and everything. So, but let me tell you what they wanted to do later. We were standing on ours, and I sent a note down to the director of the West Point band to let the boys know that John Shelley was invited to bring anyone he wanted to my room to take a bath, change their clothes because they were going to be wringing wet. And he didn't have to go with the gang. But I tell you, when they begun, the newsmen wanting to come into my room, see, I was at Potter's room, the hostess, and May Honeycutt was in ours on 5th. And she knew John Shelley and would welcome him, but I was there when that happened. But what I wanted to tell you about, they wanted to come through, step over the balcony and come through this room I was hostess for, Dr. Andrew Potter, and take a drink inside. They didn't dare take it on the outside. And I said, no, but I'll tell you what will help you do. I said, this is the head of the Baptist, Southern Baptist. But I'll let you come through this room and stand in the hall, take your drink and come back through here and come through. So I helped them get relief. I've often laughed about that. You know what Senator Kerr said when I reported? He said I was a contributor to crime.
No. go back just a little bit. What did you actually do in that first campaign for
All right.
Mr. Kerr?
All
How
right.
did you handle it?
All right. You know what I did? I could not, I had 5 organizations I could have gotten their payroll, their, what do you,
Their agenda of names.
the names and agenda is what I wanted. And thank you, Francis. And did you know I didn't have to do any of it? I had access to the rolls of the American Legion Auxiliary, and I knew in every town, I knew, having served as state president 46 and 47, and then this girl state director in 48 that year, I knew names. I didn't have to go through anybody's category of names. And I would call them ahead of time, and they paid for the call. Now, Senator Kerr's committee paid. He didn't. The expenses, they raised for the campaign. But we were on our own expenses. Senator Kerr did not furnish a car for me the first year. My husband paid all that. And May Honeycutt paid her own because she was a woman with 5 different homes, rent houses.
Yeah.
And she could pay her own, and she wasn't married. That is, she was divorced. But getting back to this, I would go into a town and I'd say, I'd drive up one time in front of the drugstore at Pond Creek, Oklahoma. There sat 3 old gentlemen, real old men, and they said, here's these rich women we hear is traveling with Governor Kerr, with Mr. Kerr, that oil man, that magnate. And I said, listen, I'm poor. So poor I've had my dress made, seersucker, a pink striped one, a blue striped one, and a green striped one, May and I. And we wore the same type dress the same day, the same, she had hers like mine and mine like hers. And that was so funny, and our little hats had been made by the late Mrs. Walter Ingram of the Altus, who was really a hatter. And we could wash our dresses out at night in the bathtub and hang them up on a hanger, and they didn't have to be ironed. One time, the senator's brother, Billy, the younger one, said, and still living, says, we wondered, he came to the room, say that the senator was going to have a prayer meeting in the room. And, well, in other words, the word of prayer, and I mean scripture and then the prayer. And so we went down there, but we were in our robe. We were in our robe and nightgown. So Billy said, oh, come on. I'll be careful. Come on. That's all right. And we just went down the hall. We were all on the same floor at the Skirvin Hotel or whatever hotel we were. And that's the way we were booked. And you'll be interested in knowing that I went 2 hours ahead of the cortege of cars. I was always 2 hours ahead in that town of the senator before he arrived. I had the women out, and it got to where his competitors would jabs at the senator saying, oh yes, the oil magnate, paying the women to come out to hear him. Nobody paid anyone anything. We weren't even paid.
You weren't.
No, sir. All I was paid later was the gasoline in my car, and they furnished me. Mr. Kerr had me a car the second time he ran. He did such a good job, He sought office again, even though we got beaten by that guy in Enid. And I had to sit by him at a convention at the Gridiron in Oklahoma City, imagine. But I treated him nice. He is a Republican.
When?
Who was it? Preston Moore?
Oh, no.
Who was it?
Oh, in Enid.
Who was
A Republican.
it? Don't remember.
When did Mr. Kerr go into politics the first time?
Right after well, that is it. That was when he made up his mind there at the convention. He had the Legion back of him. Say, do you know how strong we are in this state? Do you know how strong the American Legion is in this state? Do you know how strong the women are?
No, ma'am.
We have over 2,000 women in the American Legion Auxiliary. Yes.
So 1948 was his first time he ran?
Yes.
Is that when he was elected?
Well, that is when he was elected. He ran that year, that
He was
summer.
elected governor in 48?
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Did he serve one
No,
term?
no. He ran in 42. Let's see, he was a war governor. We had him as governor first.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to leave his years as governor out. We got out of the red into the black, and we've stayed there. Now, how it's going to be handled from now on, I have confidence that it'll still be run properly. I believe in George Nigh. He's got some good men helping him.
Yeah. When was Senator Kerr elected governor? What year?
In 1942,
42?
his boys had just come home from New Mexico Military Institute, where my boy had. And my boy, later I'll tell you, was commissioned an officer to go to, got his call. Senator Kerr put my son on the train in Oklahoma City after a very sad affair. Running for governor cost Senator Kerr his brother's wife and his pianist of his Sunday school class. You know, for years he taught a Sunday school class at the First Baptist Church in Oklahoma City.
Would you just give a few reflections of the senator?
Well, as governor or as senator?
Both.
Well, let's go back to governor.
Okay.
If you will remember, and you know anything about history, you'll remember he was our war governor and how he handled it. And he handled it for Nina Grimmett when her son was wounded. I told you yesterday about that, wounded 3 different times. And I called him and I said, Bob, you can find out. He said, I can't. My dear, tell me and I'll do it. I said, go through the Surgeon General. I'd learned through the American Legion, you know, to do a lot of things. And a lot of things I just would have blown my head and do. And the Surgeon General can find out if he's alive, because he said missing in action. See, I had no assurance of where he was and what he was.
Nina, what did you actually do for Mr. Kerr when he was senator, when he was governor? Didn't you serve on some committees?
Oh, listen, no, let me tell you. He appointed me head of the line. And within the hour, I had the privilege of resigning to go back to Altus. And you must remember, I was giving all my time to the Kiwanis Club with the minstrel shows and everything. And then it was war here, and I was working out at the base, not with pay. Remember that. I was serving with that captain's wife that the name has left me. She was educated at Duke. Grew up at Duke. And she was charming. Well, Frances didn't live with us then in Altus. She lived in Mangum, right? And I'll tell you, we couldn't do enough. Altus went all out then, like they have done with them now. Did with them when I was out there. Oh, I must finish with Senator Kerr. Really, to say finish with Senator Kerr, never will we be finished with the memories of Senator Kerr and his lovely family. And it was through him that he got a Norwegian, when he's governor, no senator, up at Minnesota, Pequot Lakes, 5 miles out, on Big Pelican. Golly, the most gorgeous fishing when you'd bring them out 30 pounds and this and that, those big northerns, those blue. Well, at any rate, he talked a Norwegian out of selling his home place, because he had just built a new one down on the road across from his club. He was putting in a club because it was good times. And the hotel was up in the woods, they call it, that fashionable Breezy Point up there. It's still there. And I'll never forget when we were up there resting. Now, that's one thing Mr. Kerr did for us. He made reservation at Breezy Point for back, not on the waterfront. It cost 4 times more than the houses just back of that. And we stayed in the houses just back of that. Now, we paid our own bill, but he was the man that went in the front, and he would say to these people, these Norwegians, don't get the idea these kids are associated with me in money matters or anything, because they're not. They've worked hard for what they've attained. and will continue to work.
What were some of the governor's, I guess, most famous accomplishments as governor?
Getting us out of the red. We'd been in the red all
How
those
did he
years.
do that?
Management, knowing how. He didn't tax us to death. Just look back into the records, they speak for themselves. He knew what to do.
How about education?
Well, education was foremost with him. Oh, Senator Kerr. Oh, did you know he was just an old-fashioned school teacher, you might say. And he bettered himself. When I say bettered himself, became better educated and everything as he went along life's way. But he paid the log cabin, they had to have a loan. And he paid it off with the first oil that came in, and he was with Uncle Frank Phillips of Bartlesville.
What about his accomplishments as senator?
Well, everything. He put Oklahoma on the map. Do you realize, Joe, you're so young. I'm glad you have a mustache, though. That makes you look older. Francis, don't you think so? Yes, he is. Listen, Joe, let me tell you a little bit about my work.
Okay.
I had to go ahead, set up the telephone, and get the crowds out. As soon as he'd start speaking, then I would get in the car, May and I quietly. We had our car parked where it wouldn't cause any commotion. With our circular shear, we'd go to the next stop. We made every stop in Oklahoma. I even was caught climbing the stairs in these, what do they call them, where you put the grain elevator, and because there'd be 7 and 8 men there. Well, I wanted their votes. I went out into fields. I heard a sweet thing about a girl here when she was working for George Nigh. Went out into field for 1 vote. She got it. And that's our own little Jenna Scarborough, Bob Scarborough's wife, that helped us in the Minstrel show.
Was Senator Kerr instrumental, or Governor Kerr, instrumental in getting the Air Force Base here in Altus?
He was the one that got the Air Force Base in Altus with the help of...
Back up, Nina. You and Mr. Kerr.
No, now, well, listen. I was for everything on earth that was good for Altus, Oklahoma. I still am.
Hey, what did you have to do with bringing the Air Force Base here?
Let's not... I just knew the right people.
Who were the right people?
Senator Kerr. Listen, it didn't hurt to know some of our presidents. Did you know this is deviating a little bit. Did you know I got President Johnson on the line after I'd had surgery and they were going to take me home? And it was Labor Day. I'll never forget, Dr. Mollison said, he's a big Republican, I just love him, but I make out like I don't. And I want you to know that he said, you are such a good Democrat. Here I'm about to let you go home this fine Labor Day and in September. And he says, we're going to let a nurse go home with you and give you a shot after we get you there and quiet. And I said, I've got a call in. You told me this morning when you were in here that I couldn't get the President of the United States. And he's left Johnson City. He arrived in Austin. He's now en route to to Washington. And I will soon have him on the line. As soon as he gets there, he won't turn my call down. He didn't. But I like to not got him because he was going to put me off. And there was the repairman for the TV, a man with the cabinet in the kitchen. And can you imagine, I had an audience with a nurse and the woman that was going to live with me 3 months. My operation was a serious one, but I came through it.
Nina, what do you know of the relationship between Mr. Kerr and President Johnson, Mr. Johnson at the time, Senator Johnson?
Well, oh, I'm so sorry. Listen, it was good. The only thing, President Johnson could be very vile. I say this with all the reverence that you can speak of someone deceased. But he could just tell them to go to, as quickly as he could tell them to go up. But at any rate, he said to me, "What can I do for you, you leading society woman of Altus?" And I blurted it out. And the first thing you know, they went back to town, the Savage boy, and told Paul Long. And Paul Long called the Oklahoma Times in Oklahoma City. And that night it was on the bottom of the page. And my son-in-law, the lovely Honorable Callaway Buckley, now deceased, had a fit. He didn't want me to have that publicity. Well, listen, I didn't care what I got. I got what I wanted. And I just said to him, a doctor said he'd give me steaks for 3 straight months if I could get to you. All I want you to do is to help feed a poor widow woman who's just had surgery.
How did the Air Force Base come to Altus? How did that come about?
You know, I'd love to give Senator Kerr all but I can't give it all to him. Did you know if we had anybody against us, it was Mangum? They didn't want us to have it. I'm sorry, Francis, but I happen to know they didn't. They didn't want us to have it. They said we got everything. They didn't want us to have the college, but we got it, didn't we, Francis? Joe, listen, you will think I don't like anybody, but I like everybody. Joe, listen, until they crossed my path against Altus. Did you know how we got Clinton Sherman? Mr. Kerr thought we needed an auxiliary. At the time, we did need it. And they've used it to a good advantage ever since.
Nina, who were the Altus men that worked so hard to help you get this, the leaders in Altus at the time?
Oh, Harrington, Wimberley, Hoyt Shaded.
Was Mr. Wimberley living in Altus, or was he head of the paper at Duncan?
No, honey, he didn't go to, Mr. Wimberley didn't go to Duncan until the last few years. Well, I tell you, he went before the Johnson was out, because Johnson took them to Houston to that big, $2,000 plate dinner.
Who helped you in Altus?
Dick Moore, and Walter Gover, the late W.B. Gover of the NBC Bank, National Bank of Commerce. And his son is still here.
Were you instrumental in having the base reopened in '53?
Listen, we're talking about the base of '53.
Okay.
I had nothing to do with that base. War brought that other base.
Okay.
This is '53 I'm talking about. January the 8th, if you want to put this down, January the 8th, 1953 is when the ribbon was cut by that lovely Kerr, Sidney Kerr,
Sidney Kerr.
That's right, a lawyer.
Who was the first commander?
Bob Kerr. You mean commander of the American Legion?
No, of the Air Force Base.
Oh, Glenn M. Jones. I even mentioned his name yesterday, honey. He's the one told me never let a 2-bit lieutenant keep me from getting his office. That's apologies to the lieutenant. He was being nice to me. I was drafted under him. That's how I did not know it. My husband knew I was to be out there for 3 months, and Mattie Williams, Miss Lloyd Williams of Altus knew it.
Nina, there's one story that you told me once that I want you to tell. When you were sitting body and this little lady came in with the rose.
Oh,
remember that story, or do you?
I remember the incident even.
Can you tell us about it, or is it too?
Wait a minute. And she was that poor lady.
Yes, that had been the paper girl.
Oh,
At the Bishop's.
down at the Huckins Hotel for 32 years.
Right.
I cannot remember her name, Joe. But this is sad for me to even tell. But when Senator Kerr lay in state, do you realize that he lay in state in a blue shirt? That he always wore a blue shirt. And on Sundays, Grace, oh, she was such a lady. Grace would get him to wear a white shirt, and he said he didn't feel normal teaching a Sunday school class with a white shirt on, and 9 times out of 10 it'd be blue. And you know, during the campaign, she gave us, I had my scissors, and they were stolen since I've been here at the home by someone, didn't think I valued them, to clip the little frayed ends around the cuffs because he didn't care if they were rabbled. It didn't matter to him.
What about the incident with the rose?
Well, we were sitting there, May Honeycutt and I. It comes to me very clearly. And we were sitting on the front seat. They had allowed us in with the body alone. It was pouring down rain. Pardon me. And in came the sweetest little old lady with a shawl around her. Now that's the way I picture old ladies. That's why I don't want to wear a shawl. But anyhow, she came down the aisle, and the funeral director brought her down himself, Stanley and Draper. And they brought her down, and she laid a rose on Mr. Kerr, just across him here in the casket, and turned, said, bless you, and some fond words, and then turned and just walked out. And when she got back, she collapsed into their arms, and they told me who she was. For 32 years, if I remember my years right, she delivered the Daily Oklahoman and Times in front of the Lee Huckins. It was known as the Lee Huckins Hotel in Oklahoma City, which was once a place to go, really a beautiful place. And I'm not going to tell you, I went up and left a very sick husband whom I lost later. See, Mr. Kerr died on January the 1st, 1963.
I remember that day.
Yes, so do I. And they called me from Oklahoma City and said, we're holding the wire to not release it, Nina, because we can't find Billy. He's hunting. And I'll never, they were always hunting on the first of the year and things like that, the boys. And they finally found him. And about 40 minutes later, she called and she said, it's going to be on the wire. So listen. And I was feeding my husband breakfast. Now, I had had the surgery on my hip all right, but I was doing things. I was on a cane. And I'll never forget, he never wanted to move from that table, and he didn't until we got him. Mr. Grimmett was very fond of Senator Kerr. Very.
Did you attend? I guess you were at the funeral, weren't
Oh,
you?
I went. They came from Amarillo and picked me up.
How many past, present, and future presidents were at that funeral?
I'm going to tell you this. I remember one, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Was it a...
How many other presidents were there?
Listen, I don't recall any being there.
There was, in the photograph, there was Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon.
But they had been.
Oh, no, listen,
But they were,
Later.
Later, no.
But the
Nixon
whole bunch.
certainly wasn't there at that funeral.
I thought he was at the funeral.
No, sir. Listen, I saw the pictures taken. I have pictures of them. And I'll never forget, we were placed one seat behind the family, like I always was and everything.
Yeah, Truman was there.
Yes. I do not recall Truman being there.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, it was raining so hard, and we had that long drive back, and I had to be with the Kiwanis that night at their big presentation affair, and I had to get in. And the lady that brought me from Amarillo there, she had been one of my co-workers with Mr. Kerr in his governor's campaign, and some in the Senate. And Emma Phillips, the late Emma Phillips, and she used to be the wife of Shelby Phillips of Altus, the Dodge dealer.
Nina,
Huh?
when is the last time that you remember having a conversation with Mr. Kerr?
Oh, while he was in bed. The Senator Kerr, we talked twice. May Honeycutt and I did, from the Skirvin Hotel, then from my home. And you know what he said? I want you to know that I'm concerned over O.B. Take good care of O.B. We've got to keep O.B. He never seemed concerned about himself. Well, I guess he had no room to be. His was a heart trouble. A heart attack killed him instantly. And he had on the pajamas that May Honeycutt and I had given him. They were baby blue with the dark blue initial and the J, the Robert S. Kerr, and it was like R, and then the S, and the K was in the middle.
What is your fondest memory of the senator?
That I have, Well, I'm going to be real selfish. I could say serving our state well, giving us the Altus Air Force Base, but most of all, being the fine young man that taught me many things about religion that I never stopped to know. He was always kind of calling me down about this and that. You're not surprised, Joe, are you?
Tell me about the Indians around Anadarko.
Oh, that's one of my loves. Listen, do you know that, well, I'll just have to go back into it. I've known the Indians around, do you realize I grew up with the Indians? I spent 15 years of my life at Mountain View.
Well, tell me about it.
Okay. Oh, golly.
Who are some of them?
Well, that's what I want to tell you. I want to tell you their really name. Anna Poolaw, put that down now. Anna Poolaw married Jasper Sonke, who was old enough to be her grandfather, but she was next in line, and I had taught her piano. I never taught an Indian before.
What tribe were they?
Oh, Kiowas. And then, you see, Comanches and Kiowas, they just hover around Anadarko. The Apaches, and, well, you might know. Have you ever been to one of them? Okay, you have. Then you know.
No, tell me about them.
Okay. Well, I happen to know the right people. That the late Dr. Holliday that figured in our show unit I told you about yesterday, well, his son and all, we got to know their sons and daughters. And then I knew the bunch in Mountain View, and right down 3 blocks from my grandparents lived one of the Kiowa George, one of the chiefs, who had 5 wives. And when statehood was declared, he had to choose between them. And he chose the third one.
Who was Kiowa George?
The chief, Indian chief, Kiowa.
Tell me about it.
Well, listen, he was a great, big, looked like a chief, and went with his hands in his pocket, never, and in front of his wife. She followed behind, which is a tradition of the Indians. And she had the most beautiful shawl on the day that she collapsed in front of my grandparents, and they had a yard with a little gate. And my grandmother had petunias growing up, and I'll never forget, they kind of tore them down in getting her body in on our porch, front porch, and my grandparents. And I was having dinner, or luncheon, with my grandmother, but we called it dinner. And I had my son then, 2 years old, Bobby Grimmett. And I'll never forget that blanket was on her, and my grandmother took it off and put a quilt on her. And you know, those Indians never would let my grandmother have the quilt back, but they gave her that expensive silk fringe blanket. And I have it to this day, only my daughter Mary Louise has it now. Cerise color. Francis, you've seen it.
Did you know Quanah Parker?
Yes, I went to Quanah Parker's home.
Tell me about Quanah Parker.
Well, I can't tell you much. He was an invalid, and he was in bed. And Jim McClintock, our congressman that I told you about yesterday, of the 7th District, lived in Snyder, right on the highway, right there before you come to the stoplight, one of those first houses.
What are your memories of Quanah Parker?
None, other than a sick man lying in bed.
What about his wives?
Well, his wife, listen, his daughter, I can't tell you about his wives because I don't know them. I went there and I stood at the foot of the bed with my children, Mary Louise and Bobby, we called him then. And I want you to know they looked at his face and see his eyes were even closed. And Mrs. Lovejoy, Birdsong, I knew I didn't say it correctly, Birdsong of Lawton, she's still living, is his daughter. And she arranged for all of this because she was fond of Jim McClintock. I don't even remember her first name.
Who were some of the other Indians that you knew?
Well, a big tree over here at Lone Wolf, the Indian chief, he was so big he had to ride flat, sitting flat in the wagon.
What was he like?
Big fat Indian.
Big fat Indian.
That's all I know. Because he'd grunt when you talked to him.
Did you know any Fort Sill Apaches?
Oh, what do you mean Fort Sill Apaches? They're just Apaches. Why did you call them Fort Sill?
Because they were on the reservation at Fort Sill.
Oh, you mean, well, look at the reservation a lot of them been on. But they were Apaches. My Lord, look at Apache, Oklahoma. All around there. It's full of them. Look at Anadarko, Oklahoma.
You ever see Geronimo?
Oh, Geronimo, no, but I can see the holes they had for him to shoot through at Fort Sill, and you can too. You've seen them, haven't you? Oh, yes. That there at Fort Sill, they have that where Geronimo had that. They've got it all blocked off there. It's right on the highway. Did you know Lawton was not named Lawton, but was named Geronimo at one time?
It was.
Yes. And then they moved it, and then they named it, and my brother married Miss Spradling, Marie Spradling, whose father helped name Lawton.
Who is it named for, Lawton?
I can't tell you. I just know it was Geronimo.
A colonel in the army.
I don't even remember. And then what is that town south of Lawton? Geronimo and, yeah.
Geronimo.
Yeah, Geronimo.
Nina, let's go back to some governors. What other governors have you known well besides Mr. Kerr, and what memories do you have of them?
Well, I was telling you about being with the Blind Commission, because I was appointed by Red Phillips, Governor Red Phillips. He was known as governor, wanted to be called Red Phillips. And I knew Alfalfa, Bill Murray.
Tell me about Alfalfa.
Oh, listen, he'd come to Altus and peel his onions sitting at the counter and drink coffee and ask for a piece of bread and put that onion between the bread. And we had a man in Altus that did likewise, the late Peden, Mr. Peden.
What was Bill Murray like?
Very untidy, very obstinate. I would have hated to have crossed his path. I stayed out of his way.
I heard he chewed tobacco.
Oh, and it came down the sides onto his shirt, and it was a celluloid shirt, you know, in color. And they would give him a wet napkin there at the New Orleans Hotel, and he could wipe it off.
Nina, did he do anything for the state that you think was really good?
Yes, he wrote the Constitution of the state of Oklahoma. He surely did. I believe in giving the devil his dues. But I love to think about the late Clyde Fought, who came to Altus as an appointee of Governor Phillips, of Governor Alfalfa Bill. And you know, at times I've seen Clyde kind of be ashamed of it, just a little, because he was so uncouth and so, you know.
You ever hear about the bridge incident across the Red River with Bill Murray?
Oh, yes, you brought something up I haven't thought about in years. Suppose you can enlighten my memory a little.
What about where Texas built the toll bridge across the Red River and Bill Murray went down and opened it up?
Oh, yes. Well, that is out of Durant, wasn't it?
I think so.
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, he lived at Tishomingo.
Tell me about Red Phillips.
Well, let's begin with a very big, burly type man. Red face, red hair. And my memories were this way. I was for General William Keyes, William S. Keyes. Commander had been of the National Guard unit that went overseas and did themselves proud under William S. Key. And he was appointed the head of the McAllister Penitentiary. And never shall I forget, I worked so hard for him, but it didn't to no avail, because Red Phillips had it all cut out. You know what Red Phillips said to me when he called me in? I said, Governor, I don't want, and by the way, this late Emma Phillips took me up there that June morning in '39, and I said, I don't want to fly under false colors. I did not support you. He said, no, but your parents in Lawton sure did. MV and Lily's jaw. He called her Lily. Her name was Lillian. And I said, yes, they did. But I supported Bill Key. He said, well, I like you for your honesty, but I didn't appoint you for that. I want your leadership out in the 7th District. It was the old 7th then. I later found out he wanted my leadership and my mailing list of all the names because he was going to run for United States Senator.
Did you know Jack Walton?
Yeah, oh, my father loved Jack Walton. Now that you're talking about my father's days, Jack Walton was some man. I'm going to just put it that way.
Why was he?
He was a man's man.
Why was he removed from office?
He was impeached. You knew that.
Yeah, why was he removed?
And you knew who did it?
Who?
Henry Johnson.
So he could become governor?
Yes.
How? Why was he removed? What? I mean, I don't know the story.
I don't either. I don't even recall.
Who's another governor after Phillips? Who did you know next best? Kerr
Well-
followed Phillips.
Yes.
And then it was.
You see, Kerr wanted me to get out of the mess. That's exactly what he said, if you want to know his words. And go home and be with OB and your family a while. And I said, all right. And that you must remember, I'd been with Phillips in 39. My son was getting ready to go to military school in September. And I thought, oh, this is an answer to a prayer. Right on, a job offered me on a platter. And I accepted it. And I said to him, I just do not know blind people. I know one, and she's not blind, Miss Laura Proctor of Altus. And she is a late Miss Laura Proctor now. Do you know what you're doing for me?
What?
She's always wanted to get me still and dictate my life to her so she could take it down on an electric grill. No.
Typewriter.
Well, it's
Well,
electric braille.
Braille.
Yeah.
And I never would get still, and I didn't think I was coming to this.
Raymond Gary.
Raymond Gary now is a he-man on a side that if he thinks it's red, he's going to say it's red. I'll say that for Raymond Gary, even though we didn't just kind of click.
Edmondson.
Edmondson was kind of the lightweight type governor.
Pardon me. Go ahead.
Well, and then Preston came.
How about Turner? Did you
Oh,
know Mr.
Roy Turner, yeah, that was such a gentleman. Roy Turner was such a gentleman. You know, when I think of Roy Turner, I think of Sulphur and Turner Falls and all of that land down there. Did you know I had an experience that Roy Rogers and what is his wife's name? Dale Evans. They were in a picture out of Sulphur there at Davis, Oklahoma. You know where you come from Sulphur, from the Veterans Hospital, and turn. Our entertainers had been there. Well, the man here on the corner, the second from the filling station, always let us stop at night and eat and have a good meal before we drove on into the city. So to make a long story short, he said, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, to make a long story short, when we got there, it was poorly lighted, and I knew this, why, Saturday night, and I thought, we've got to get in there. And so I said to Mrs. Biggert, I gave you her name yesterday, Lenora Biggert, my blues singer. I said, just go up the door and shake it. Tell that Mr. Davis we want in there. This was Davis, Oklahoma, but Mr. Davis ran this, no, alluding to the name of the city. And when he opened the door, why, it was a representative of Roy Turner, of Roy Rogers. And Dale Evans was there. And they said, we have this rented privately tonight for our cast. They were over there at, oh, what was that?
Making a movie.
Yes,
Go ahead.
okay. And the owner heard them talking, or heard Lenora, and she had a deep voice, you know, contralto. And he said, just a minute, those are my regulars. They're entertainers. And the moment he said that, Roy Rogers got up, came to the door, and he said, open the door wide, all welcome. I always loved him from then on. And of course, at that time, his wife was ill, and she died. The child lived. And you see, he and Dale were trying to link their names together then, but it was not true, I'm sure. Roy Rogers is very honorable. but they married, and haven't they done a tremendous job for the orphans?
Nina,
Yes.
we're jumping from governors here. Should we
Uh-huh.
go back, or do you want, she's got a good story to tell.
Okay.
Tell about George Gobel and your experience with George.
Oh, here, when this base, World War II, guess who I pinned the wings on?
Who?
George Gobel. And you know what? He was as corny then as he is now. And I love to say that because you know that little building out there that's a family building? Oh, they've got a good one now. But it's the only one that has the little chimney and the little green place. They're keeping that for posterity for Altus. And it's a little frame building. But guess what? It has a small little bar and a fireplace. And George Gobel used to stand with his foot on the bar and sing and string the guitar and all. You know what they used to do when they came in from flights at night? Do you think there was one thing on that base open to feed those men? And the Rainbow Cafe put this down. They did everything for the boys in the air at night. They would let them come down the alley and the law would guard their cars. Oh, will you ever forget how good our law was to them? I never. And I used to go down because I wanted to lead George out, and he had always carried it locked in the back of his car, his guitar. And he would sit they had booths up on the back, and the guys would all be in here, and the table pulled up, and they would all have steaks, of course. And Ray and Ruby Jones, they were down there, but they had a brother older than that was really the one that stayed open.
Didn't you put George in one of his first shows?
No, I didn't put him in. Oh, you mean here when he was here? Yes.
He did for the Kiwanis Club.
Yes, uh-huh. And guess what?
What?
The Kiwanians even laughed at him. They thought he was so corny. But you know, everybody's laughed at him at one time or other. But I like to think about this. The Chamber of Commerce, I love them dearly. They have done so much for me. And how could I fail with somebody like Francis Herron right here helping me? And I enlisted everybody in town. We had to have a good show. We had to have a good percentage on the door.
Listen, Nina,
Uh-huh.
we're missing some governors that I want
Okay.
you to tell about. After Turner, after Edmondson came, who?
I can't even remember.
Was it Bellman?
How about Bellman and then Hall?
Oh, listen, I was very close to Hall.
I know.
I was so close to Hall that he came out here. Let's leave Edmondson and them out. Because, you know, a lot of times you don't get as much involved. You're doing other things.
Yeah.
But Hall, I got very involved.
Tell me about David Hall.
Oh, listen, David Hall, regardless of what, they never did prove anything on him other than he was with the men from Dallas who accepted the money and all. But David Hall, I called him at prison the night he got out because I had been tuned in and I knew at 6 o'clock in the morning he was going to be released. And she and the boy were there to pick him up. And I called him and he said, I'll never forget you. Will you do one thing for me? Call Sweet Pea Abernathy and call the Bobby Kerrs and tell them that if his daughter in the meantime had married a boy at Frederick. He said, had Daddy been home, that wouldn't have happened. And she was fixed to have a baby and was having a hard time. He said, my first trip will be after going to California to get lined up, and he did. You know, he's an attorney out there. But I don't hear from David since I've been here at the home. I don't know whether he knows I'm still living or not. But the thing is, he didn't get to come see Altus because his daughter was stricken ill, and he had to go to Frederick. But she sent us books out to our little, that's a phase of my life that I love to think about, the community action in Altus. And getting Hoyt Shaded to help me build that Lincoln. Mm-hmm. You know where it is, don't you?
No.
Lincoln, don't you know where Lincoln?
He's new in town now.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're from Oklahoma City.
Yes, ma'am.
Don't forget to leave me another card. I sent your card to my Mary Louise at Duncan.
Nina, we'll finish with governors
Okay.
here now. Tell us about George.
George Gobel.
No, Nigh.
Oh,
Governor Nigh.
I told you a little something yesterday about I had changed his, put on, what do you call them, training pants. And he won't deny it. See my fan up there? Fan with Nigh?
Mm-hmm.
Right there, it slid down.
Right. Did you know Bellman?
Very, very little. I'll tell you what I did. When I was director of Girls State, we went back for our reunion. I had to take Bellman in so far. And then the Girls State governor, you knew how they were dead, took him on. And then I led Mrs. Bellman on down, and we were seated down here while he was seated up there with the Girl Staters, the cities. Listen, she was one of the most gracious ladies. So was he as a man. But they said he had this, he had that in a farm. He had it because he borrowed every dime from the federal government to get started in land up there. That's how Bellman got started, and he can't deny it. That I know.
What about Bartlett?
Who?
Bartlett.
Well, I don't know enough about Bartlett to discuss him, other than I knew his governor and I kept up with him. But I'd rather talk about Nigh.
Okay, George Nigh.
Yes. To me, he's made one of the most successful governors besides Bob Kerr. And I think he'll pull us out of what we're about to happen. I've invited November the 19th up for the good guys. Somebody thought I was a good guy. They invited, but I didn't see a free ticket. But I never have paid.
You better let him know it.
Well, listen, no, I'm sending my regrets. See, I would have to go and then have the wheelchair. And they're not going to start till 6 and over at 11:30 on Saturday night. And I can't go and come in one day. Because I found out, even yesterday, the interview.
Wore you out.
Yeah. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Now then, we never have finished and got to Willie Tyler. Do you know I put this colored boy? Oh, he was so black. And he came to me, let me tell you, as Airman Third. And will you ever forget he came to me? He says, I'm here to do anything I can to help you. He said, I understand I'll have to sweep the floors. He said, I have swept floors to keep from starving
Now,
to death.
this was at the Minstrel show, Kiwanis Minstrels.
No, this
All
is
right.
me as a director over the boys at the base.
Okay.
All right, and I said, do you know I've got a place for you? And it's coming up right away. And he said, what? And I said, oh, he pulled out his billfold, and I saw he had been an entertainer with a little Willie, the Smile Blenders. And he said, oh, that's when I was in the 7th grade. And I saw USO back of it, and I knew no USO had dropped him if he had good talent. And they hadn't, and he was selling himself short. And I said, where is your little Lester? He said, at home. I said, we'll get on the phone tonight, call your mother, and you can charge it to my phone. After everything's over tonight, we'll call her. In Detroit, Michigan, we did. She shipped that out here, and guess what little Lester had on when he got here? A little sky blue silk suit. And he said to me, I can't let him appear in that. She sent his other clothes. Said, Mother's made him real sissy since I left home. And he put on these other things. And I'll never forget what a lady said here, Mrs. Starkey, a seamstress, said. When I went to ask her to sew for him, she said, well, I never did sew for a dummy. I sewed for many people who were kind of dumb. Oh, Nettie Starkey. I'll never forget that. A lot of people wouldn't believe she would have said that, but she did.
Mrs. Grimmett, we're going to have to get back over to the
Okay.
museum. I hate to run.
Well, listen, I'll tell you this much.
Okay.
The Senator Phillips, Governor Phillips, did me an honor when he appointed me head of the blind. And I had the same secretary 4 years, and she's head of the museum over in Tahlequah. And her name is Stinson.
Mm-hmm.
Callie Stinson.
Yeah. There.
Okay, good.